and so are you, Matt. Welcome to another Cladding Matters. You'll recognise some of the usual suspects, of course, our Lord and Master Hamish McClare of Search Convey and Zara Ollie-Bookus of Nexus Law. Welcome to a new guest, Matt Lismore, our housing campaigner, and we will be joined by Steve Day, as per usual, from his bunker on the Royal Artillery Quays. But for the moment, as per is traditional, we're going to pass over to Hamish to start us off.
Well, first of all, we need to actually sort of think about what is sort of going ahead in terms of our situations with the cladding matters, as we call it, because this is called cladding matters for good reason. And we started off speaking of cladding matters. What has become more vital as time has sort of passed by, we need to be actually looking at safety matters, but also too, the people involved, they have a challenge with cladding and the building in which they're involved, but at the same time, they may have been bought into or been encouraged on some occasions, even pressured on other occasions, to actually take shared ownership of a property within that particular type of environment, within that type of building, without knowing the full repercussions of either the cladding, the safety, or heaven forbid, the fact that it's of shared ownership as well. And We're very fortunate this week to be bringing with us Matt, who is very experienced in a number of things, certainly a campaigner there in terms of what we're speaking relative to what's going on in the property industry. And we've got Zara as well, that we know full well what her feelings are about sort of shared ownership and the challenge she has with her clients, trying to actually get them into a property that she knows is risk secure. I say risk secure, it's secure against risk rather than actually having risk.
Well, let me start off. Zara, welcome as ever to the show. Being as I'm a complete muggle, would you explain to me what actually is shared ownership and why is this today's topic? Don't do it, the Shared Ownership Chronicles.
Well, it's been sold as shared, but the only part of it that is shared is the part where you buy. So it's part buy, part rent. Everything else falls onto the leaseholder. And it's not really shared in that aspect. The leaseholder is given a lease, so they've got their own title. And it's a one-sided agreement entirely in favour of the landlord. It's designed to make the landlord money from rental income, and it's designed to be a free ride for them because, the leaseholder pays for all the repairs, all the service charges, 100% of everything. But also they're not willing to help poor leaseholders who do come across issues with defects in their properties. And I've only had an inquiry in this morning from a young lady who got sent to the recommended solicitor. She said, well, I made that choice. I'm not silly. I asked all the questions. She bought the flat in 2024. It's a brand new flat. She's received a Section 20 notice for remediation works for the fire doors. So, one must be asking, why on earth, was that passed through without proper building regulation certificates? And if that's the case...
Hang on a moment. Hang on a second. Shouldn't there have already been the bloody fire doors? Why are they being retrofitted, and why is she being tapped up for it?
Exactly. So she wants to be pointed in the right direction, but I'm not a litigator. I'm a conveyancer.
No, but you're a woman of uncommonly wide knowledge, so I'm glad you're here. Matt, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Shared ownership. I assume that fills you with dread, as it does with me. Now I understand that it's a one-sided agreement in favour of the other side. can you tell me a little bit about your story, how you come to be a housing campaigner, and also can you give me your feelings on shared ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me on. I think the brief intro to my story is that I bought a shared ownership property back in 2019. It was my first property. It was all I could afford was shared ownership in London.
But you'd ask the right questions up front anyway, I assume.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I thought I had, and I probably fell for the trick of using the recommended conveyancers for the transaction, because it would help me get into the property sooner, was the carrot that they dangled in front of me, and they offered to pay a percentage towards it if I used that conveyancer. So I thought, oh well, I get in quicker and I get a bit of money off. That seems like a good transaction. And people that are using affordable housing schemes are normally quite minded to try and save a bit of money if they can, given that it ultimately is sold as an affordable product. So I used the recommended conveyancer, and it was really only after living there for about a year or so, having bought that 70% share, I rapidly realised I'd made a mistake, and the crux of it was that the building just wasn't built correctly. My freeholder was Barking and Dagenham Council, so I had made the probably naive assumption in thinking that where they're a public body, they would really want to make sure that their residents and constituents weren't taken advantage of by the developer that built it on their behalf. But as has been mentioned already, and this was met with total resistance in trying to even get the defects remediated. And for those that don't know, it ultimately ended in 5 balconies partially collapsing from our estate within 5 years of construction. The first 4 balcony collapses were widely ignored by Barking and Dagenham Council, who just pretty much pretended that it hadn't happened or that it wasn't serious. No remediation work was undertaken. And it was only when a tweet of mine went viral after the 5th collapse and the media turned up that all of a sudden there was remediation work to be done. It was a scandal, and we deserved better from that moment on. I would never, ever recommend to anybody to buy shared ownership, given what I've been through. It was, as Zara said, a totally one-sided arrangement. Although I only owned a percentage of the capital value of the apartment, I was responsible for maintaining the entire apartment and freehold,
right,
which protected the value of the freeholder's asset and actually helped to appreciate it, so that in the future, when I went to buy the rest of it, I could give them more money, because by virtue of the maintenance I'd paid for on the building. It's a very perverse relationship, and actually entirely inappropriate as to be called an affordable product. So my advice would be run for the hills. I had a particularly difficult time with it, and as the BBC concluded in their report, our homes presented a risk to life from day one, and nobody listened to us. The freeholder, the developer, nobody. And it truly was a nightmare to live through.
Hamish, I believe that Matt is by no means a one-off. This seems to be the current trend.
I think what we're finding, and I mean, it's great to have you with us, Matt, and we do appreciate your coming on to join us, because what we are finding time after time after time, there are new releases, if you like, from different people like Matt explaining his experience. We have repeatedly from Zara saying, look, shared ownership is something which needs to be, if you're going to go down that route, tread with care. In fact, my advice would be exactly the same as Matt, not a good way to go. However, some people, because that's the only way through, and Matt presented this to us, it's the only way to get your foot onto that ladder, and it seems a practical way. And even worse still, and this is where, of course, so often we've got Wendy, and she'll be listening in today anyway, who looks after first-time buyers. It's the sort of thing that Wendy would be pointing people in the direction of and sort of saying, let's have a look at this. And as I said, Zara will be the first to sort of point out if you had the opportunity, Matt, to go down the route of Zara looking after, she would have asked the question about sort of various aspects of the build. But what we're finding here, and this is where building safety comes into it, it can be cladding because we see that on the outside. But as we are finding out more and more, once you get away from that cladding, there's so much goes on beneath that cladding, but also the interior of the building. Now, the cladding is not anticipated with basically what we're speaking about. With if balconies are going to start, balconies, it's fairly obvious they're falling down. You can see it. And the challenge is trying to get builders to commit to remediating stuff which they're totally responsible for. They don't want to commit. Oh, right. Zara's very, she tell you what, she's just the person to speak to. They are within the cladding remit.
Wow.
We find out that, and it was one of our, again, that somebody came along with one of their stories, their particular property, which is in a series of, I don't know how many flats there are there, because it's demanded that work is started, somebody came in and they fixed four, I think, they actually fixed 4 balconies out of goodness knows how many balconies to suggest they had started work, where in actual fact it just means absolutely nothing. What's 4 balconies out of sort of 100 or so flats? Absolutely nothing of any consequence. What about the rest of the building? What about the interior? So we've got a worrying situation here. And it's only, I mean, Zara knows the legalities of some aspects of it. Matt's got the experience now. And there's people like, so you and I, Gareth, we look on in horror as to how on earth this can happen.
It's incredible to me that people have been lured into the lion's den, Paul Matt and many other people like him. Zara, tell me, there must be an occasion when shared ownership is a good thing. Surely you can point to an occasion where it represents value in some way.
Only if you're buying a house that's an older house without estate service charges, but I'm experiencing issues on staircasing where housing associations are trying to stick in an estate service charge for areas that they own, but were not included within the original lease. And I have to fight tooth and nail, but sometimes people just go, I'm just going to pay because I need to move in. I haven't got the time to argue. And this is how they continue to get away with it.
So hang on a moment. Is this just shameless profiteering?
Yes, it is. It is. And a lot of these people are signed up to the Shared Ownership Council Code. And yet, the code means nothing. They will continue to grab an opportunity to charge people wherever they can. So they're jumping on the developer bandwagon of putting in estate service charges to retain a continual income from the property, even if they're not actually doing anything.
I'm very pleased to say that we have Steve Day from his bunker within Royal Artillery Keys. We're talking the marvel that is shared ownership. And I say marvels, I can't believe they're actually getting away with it. We have Matt Lismore, who is, like yourself, subject of draconian situations. What is your opinion on shared ownership and what it represents, Steve?
Well, I mean, at Royal Artillery Keys, and firstly, sorry for being late, work took over again. No, at Royal Artillery Keys, we've got residents that are paying the £6,000 a year service charge for all of this additional insurance because of all the defects. Our fire shafts are packed full of Euro Class C, the second most combustible material known to Europe, of panels. We've got EPS cladding and so on. Shared ownership people own 25% of their property in most cases and are paying 100% of these egregious, unjust service charges. And there's no end in sight. And what's worse that we found is that although I'm a leaseholder and I own outright, they can't get hold of the information I can get hold of from the managing agent. So Rendell and Rittner is our one. I can, well, I mean, it's not easy to get documents, but I can force them to do it. But if you're a shared owner, you can't even force them, you don't have any relationship with the managing agent, and they flat out refuse to talk to you if you're a shared owner. So you've got to go via your shared ownership provider, which I think in our case is Moat, and I think you've got Southern Housing as well. And it's just terrible. So you're prevented from getting critical information. You're forced to pay 100% of the service charge. You own 25% of the property, and you feel 100% more out of control than I think a normal leaseholder would. And I think talking to it, because I'm the residents chair of the Residents Association, I've got 1,000 people that I have to manage, you know, it's unbelievable. And this is basically why we need the Earl of Lytton's consumer protection legislation, which basically
will that cover shared ownership as well?
Yeah, it covers every ownership structure, leasehold, commonhold, and it basically means that no one will have to go to court to get their defects fixed. They'll be made to, and not to the partial PAS 9980, leave the stuff on standard, thank you, to building regulations at the time now. So that's what we want to get through the Lords, and that's what we're working hard on. And just to plug, I've managed to get an amendment approved for the Liberal Democrat Conference to basically get rid of PAS and reform PAS to Building Safety Act, Building Safety Risk definition, and also ensure all 1.7 million leaseholders currently excluded from the Building Safety Act Schedule 8 protections are in fact then covered.
What's the lower height buildings, you mean?
Lower height, those that have been franchised, and those that own buildings more than 3. You know, those 3 categories will then be covered, and then we'll launch into amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill afterwards. So we'll hopefully make some progress in the latter half of this year, or latter quarter of this year. But yeah, great to have you, Matt. Sorry I missed your contribution.
Well, no, I'm going to grab Matt before we go much further. Matt, in the light of what Steve says, the Earl of Lytton's amendments and changes would potentially cover all this. I assume that you're loosely in favour of all of that.
I am, but I think, you know, some of the things that have been touched upon in a more detailed way, and some of the things that Zara mentioned around being really crafty with things like staircasing, with, you know, as Steve said, with regards to getting information. I could just give some anecdotal, you know, examples of what I experienced with Barking and Dagenham Council. They had a process in place where a RICS chartered surveyor had to value the property to decide the value when you staircase. I used their preferred RICS valuation company, paid for the report, presented them the report and said, I'd like to staircase now to 100%. Here's the valuation. And it took them 3 months to come back to me and say, this report isn't from RICS, it's from a chartered surveyor. And I had to explain to the council that RICS are an accrediting body, not the actual people you go to. And they were so confused and so slow to respond. I had to choose between my mortgage rate expiring for purchasing the extra and fighting them on these issues. And I ended up paying the additional price that they asked for. So my flat was valued at 280,000 by the RICS accredited provider that they asked me to use. They said, no, we think it's worth 320 grand. We want, you know, and I was only buying 30%. So it was an extra £12,000. And I had to weigh up between continuing to fight this losing battle of explaining to incompetent people how to actually do their own lease process that they had defined, or just paying the money. I ended up just paying the money because I couldn't wait. My mortgage terms were going to expire and the rate would have gone up so much, and it wasn't worth it.
There are many people who will find themselves in your position who don't have access to 12 grand. Or how?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate, right? I'm fortunate that I was able to staircase. I'm fortunate that I was able to pay the extra. I'm fortunate that I've been able to sell my home and move now to a freehold property where the hole in the roof is my problem. Thank you. And the hole in the roof is my problem and my problem alone to fix. And that's fine. That's how I wanted it. But there was so much more to that. You know, we couldn't get any service charge information out of Barking and Dagenham Council.
Yeah.
They sent us the council's annual accounts as proof of our service charges. They went, they were called, yeah. And they were scolded on BBC Newsnight. They were scolded on BBC London. We found out they were stuffing parking fines for their staff into the service charges for shared owners. And we were only able to get this information because the Information Commissioner said they breached the Freedom of Information Act by not providing it. And they were told they'd be in contempt of court if they didn't hand that over. These are all examples where they were already breaching the existing legislation. It's for me, it's an issue of enforcement with these people. They think they can get away with anything. And we will just accept whatever we get. You know, if we get homes that are remediated to subpar standards, we'll just have to put up with it. If we're not given the service charge information, we should just shut up and pay for it. One last final example, if I may.
But Matt, the whole basis on which this channel exists is around councils and associated bodies assuming that tenants, occupiers, owners will just roll over and take it.
Yeah. And in the most part, they do, because they don't have the time and the ability to advocate for themselves, or the money, especially in affordable housing, to employ the professionals that can. An example of somebody in my building, they asked for a license to assign when they were selling their share. They had to pay a sale charge based on the full value of the property, a percentage of the full value of the property, even though they only owned 30%.
Disgusting, man.
That's disgusting.
But it gets worse. They wanted £1,250 for the license to assign, even though the lease said £250. When they were pushed on it, they said, "Oh, this must have been an error." But it took 6 or 7 pushes by their conveyancer to say, "Why is this 1,250?" But the point is, they just try and take everything. You can't assume that anything they tell you is correct or true. You can't assume it's built correctly, that they're following their rules, that they're following the lease, or that they even ever intend to. And that's a really tough spot to be in as somebody that just wants to own a home to live in.
No, it sounds like you're being beset on all sides. So I'm afraid we have to wind it up for today because we're pretty much at the end of our time. Hamish.
I think we've demonstrated that this is yet again another part story which has actually sort of come out, and it will be actually sort of good. Let's get sort of Matt together. Let's get Zara together. Let's have another podcast, and we speak specifically about this side of things, as well as the sort of damning sort of illustrations from these councils, as well as trying to sort of almost carry out daylight robbery relative to shared ownership. What they're doing in not even supporting their residents. They don't have an interest. They want the bigger picture. They want the monies. They're broke. Let's find a way of actually getting in. And quite a very, very interesting thing to go alongside of this that Steve pointed out. So another 2 councillors within the sort of Greenwich Council, they've actually resigned the whip. They're saying they're going to go forward as independents because they feel that the council itself is not interested in looking after their residents. They want hired to be doing higher things. The head councillor there, as we all know him so well these days, he's decided that really they should be the council represented.
Please don't mention him by name, Hamish, otherwise we might be accused of bullying. Just so you know.
His name. Everybody knows his name now.
No, don't mention the name.
Oh right. Okay, yes. We'll have him chasing me next.
Yeah.
But the whole thing about it is this council is damning itself every step it takes. Because how on earth can we've now had 4 residents within this sort of period of, if you like, sort of membership actually resigned or forced to resign because the council itself is failing to look after their own residents. And interestingly enough, one of those who actually sort of resigned the whip, Steve actually tried to get actually himself onto the council to represent his members that he is actually sort of looking after. They parachuted somebody in from outside. This was the Labour Party. They parachuted, and that person has still not been in touch, has still not spoken to residents within that building. And there's thousands of them who have serious issues. This is a worrying aspect.
Well, I think it's even more worrying that apparently what Matt has just dropped a note. The leader of Barking and Dagenham Council said that if he was him, he would have sued the council That can't be a way forward. Every time that the discussion is pointless because the only way forward is to take them to court.
Money, as Sarah points out, who has the money to actually do that?
No, of course.
We'd love to be able to do it. We can't carry out these class acts like they can in America. It would be a lovely story if we actually could.
Well,
we will
Zara, do you have something to chip in with? Sorry.
Well, I was just sort of going to say this is what Steve and the building safety scheme is fighting for.
Absolutely.
Remediation without having to take court action. You know, people should be entitled to safe homes, and it's not just flats, but flats are badly affected. We've seen this on shared ownership houses. There was a house down in Exeter that burnt down, and a colleague of mine lived on that site. And they didn't realise, until the building burnt down, that the developer didn't put in the fire safety barriers on a row of terraced houses. So it's not just flats, it's houses too. And it's, they want to make buying and selling properties easier, but, what about sorting out the mess they've made in the first place of allowing the developers to cut corners? This lady who contacted me this morning should not be having to pay to remediate her front door. That should have been built to building safety standards. It hasn't changed from 2024.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to have to bring this to a close because we're running out of time. Thank you so much, as ever, Zara Olibokas and Nexus Law. Of course, Steve Day of the Building Safety Scheme. Thank you so much, Matt Lismore, or Housing Campaigner, and of course Hamish McClay of Search and Convey. And I appreciate these are troubling times, and as Zara has pointed out, it seems that perhaps many conveyancers don't even know all this information. So we're providing yet an extra service here. Please take note and be careful with shared ownership. It sounds tricky at best. And staircasing, as Zara says, is not necessarily a solution. But I want all of you, please, just keep your feet on the ground, reach for the stars, and please try and look after that mental health. Until next week, goodbye.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll promise you the moon, but their word always fails.